It's time for another episode of Darth's Train Shop. And in this episode, I have a very old brass model by Tetsudo, and it is their version of an F unit. So this was on eBay for probably about a year with no one buying it. And originally I wasn't going to either, just because, it's such a crude F unit, as you can very clearly see. There's very little to it at all, and on top of that, it has a very interesting bit of damage to the cab. But it was up there for so long and looked so sad all on its own, I thought I'd go ahead and get it, see what I can do about fixing it up. Let's just pull this back apart, get things out of the box here. I don't know exactly when this was made, but I believe it was probably the mid-50s, no later than the late 50s. Tetsudo wasn't really around for that long compared to some of the other brass manufacturers of the day, and their models always had a very hand-tooled quality and hand-built quality about them, unlike some of the others that would come up with more professional tooling and castings and other things, where these, for the most part, were very simple models. Their steam engines were definitely better than their diesels because they could just use piping to make the boiler and then put a bunch of wire and other details and turned parts to make the details around it, and they looked all right. But these diesels are definitely about as simple and inaccurate as you can get. So, let's see what I can do here. First I'll take this plate off. I guess I can't really take that plate off. That is soldered onto the shell. Yeah, so I'll have to solder it back to this side and repair that crack there. As for the headlight, I don't know about keeping that. Is that a set screw holding a glass light bulb in? Okay, not quite. The set screw is tightened against the brass on the outside of the bulb, but even so, very interesting decision. I have never seen anyone do that before. Also wonder if this slide even still works. That is, let's see if I can get the macro lens up there. So you see that, these are cloth wrapped wires. That is about as old as you can get for this kind of fine wiring in HO scale. In fact, the only cloth wrapped wires I've seen before were on old Lindsay and Varney chassis, and those were about the thickness of my screwdriver here. So that's some impressively thin wrapping. In fact, this could be the sort of wire that was used to wind the electromagnetic poles and motors. The frame looks like it's in decent shape. I don't see any problems there. It just has a lot of tarnish. We'll get that cleaned off. And then it looks like there's a second light in there, as well as some screws and other parts. Let's see what all we've got here. A lot of small paper bags that are very torn up. And a whole bag of screws. Not just screws, it's all the rest of the parts too. That's good. There it is. Another light. Oops. And this here is the variable pulley for the motor. So you could set different speeds. There's the other roof vent. Oh wait, two pulleys. So Let's see, one of these would be for the motor. Actually, I think the original instruction sheet is in here. Let's carefully open that up. Looks like it's been taped together before. Don't want to rip that. They made it as a blueprint. Let's see here. So it looks like the double pulley goes on the motor, and then the single pulley on the worm shaft of the truck. Here we go. And this is an F3. I couldn't remember if it was that or an F2. Of course, with this detail, it hardly even matters anyway. And the motor, very typical of your Japanese brass of the time. It's at least turning freely enough, but I'm guessing this is going to need some cleanup. That mostly looks like tarnish on the armature, or on the commutator. It does run. Yeah, it's just cleaning right through that tarnish. Already working better. Of course, don't want to run it for long with dry bearings. So let's get some oil in there. And let's see, the other side is an oil pad. So we can soak that a little bit. So since the rear motor bearing is difficult to access, this pad will, in theory, help to prevent it from drying out, as long as it's got plenty of oil inside. Yeah, that motor's running just fine. It's using just slightly over 1/4 of an amp, running at 12 volts there. One and a half amp stall current. That's about half as much as the Tetsudo or Akane from motor from the same time. So yeah, that's a pretty good motor that they put in there. Don't need to do any more maintenance on that. And that turns really freely now that it's been running a little bit. Now, what else have we got here? So that is the original spring belt. I wonder how this links, if it just kind of screws together a little or what. It seems like it's pretty well hooked together there just from pushing the two ends together. So that should be good. This needs to go back onto the top of the body. Looks like the solder joint was a cold one. It never properly set. So that'll look like that. Very well detailed and realistic roof vents. Best I've ever seen. Now, as for how this thing works, it's just a single truck drive. Worm over each axle. Driven by the pulley from the motor. So this is pretty much the same as most of the other drive units from the 40s and 50s. It was very common to have the motor on top with either gears or a belt and pulley to drive the worm shaft below. This is how just about all the Varneys were set up, as well as quite a few others I've seen from that time. So nothing unusual here. It's an easy way to put together a motorized diesel truck. It's turning kind of stiff though, so I wonder if I can take this apart and do anything about that. Oh, Okay. There's one part and the other one. Okay, so these little plates around the gears also act as nuts to help hold the truck together. So that lifts off. This is a single assembly that has been soldered together, which means the worm shaft is permanently installed. Oh yeah. That's not a sound you want to hear. Let's get some oil in that. Much better. Yeah, those parts are still in real good condition. And as for the axles, looks like there's another part that is permanently assembled. Yeah, that's soldered below. Just flexible enough, though, that I can take the axles out. Huh. Okay. So it looks like for the insulated wheel, they put on a little piece of brass, as well as an insulating washer to prevent short circuits. Before I can really clean things up or resolder them, I need to get rid of this tarnish. Move this over here. Okay, what I'm gonna do is throw all these major parts into this vinegar bath. And I'll just let that soak for a while, and that should clean off at least the majority of the tarnish. Well, no harm getting it off the pulleys. I'll leave the screws out. Anyway, I will just leave that sitting in there for a while and come back and see how parts are looking. Alright, that's been sitting for about an hour. Let's see what we've got here. Looks like it's already been doing some work. Oh yeah. It is amazing how much that tarnish can build up over the decades. And it's already looking a lot cleaner. But it's going to need a lot more than this, so I'll scrub that stuff off and then leave it for a little while longer and we'll see how it is. As I'm working at this, I wonder if this actually has some sort of a clear coat that's just kind of discolored over time. So I'm gonna dry this off a little bit and see what happens if I try using a little bit of thinner or other solvent. Alright, so after examining things, that is not any sort of clear coat, it really is just heavy tarnish. And also, as it turns out, this is not a brass model. This is made from bronze. So it has a different color to it from brass. It's a lot more red. So only some of the parts are brass, like the wheels, but let's see, the side frames, I think these are also brass, but anything that is made from sheet metal looks like it's all bronze. So I'll just continue with cleaning up the tarnish from this, get off as much as possible, then I can get to actually repairing it. While the shell is soaking, I'm taking care of some of these other parts. It looks like those brass spacers on the wheels are actually nuts, and they are responsible for holding things together. So tighten that real good onto the threaded axle, and it holds together nice and tight. And it looks like these are also correctly gauged, so those will work just fine. See how all that's going to run. So I'll just, let's see, get to putting these back in. I don't remember which way they had it arranged for the electrical pickup, but probably might not matter too much. Yeah, both brushes insulated, so don't have to worry about that. So I'll just do my usual of front truck positive and rear truck negative. It seems like the construction of this truck is a bit sloppy, so this will need plenty of oil to make sure that it holds up well. Let's see, and this fit somewhere. Oh, this goes on top for the motor, so a couple little parts in here that I'm not sure about. There are also these screws that have really tiny hex heads in them. So if I have to use those, I'll have to find a tool that fits. They're just long enough to pass through those two layers and then screw into that one part. It's kind of binding up. It looks like a little bit of solder might have gotten into those two gear teeth when they were putting this together. It is kind of freeing up as I turn it though, so not quite this way. Well, in that case, I think I know what to do to fix that. I don't want to mess up the soldering that they did to hold the gear in place. So what I'm going to try doing is using a wire wheel to kind of brush the solder out. Since brass is harder than lead, should be able to do it. Okay, the wire wheel wasn't quite doing it, so what I'm trying now is just carving the solder out carefully using the edge of a razor. That seems to be getting it so far. Just have to work gently. Okay, looks like that did it. Also made a small adjustment to the retainer plate down there. There's just a slight bind, but yeah, beyond that, it seems like everything is working the way it should now. And any leftover bits of solder should just kind of wear out with some run time. But it looks like it's going to run smoothly. So next up, first I'm going to take this truck retainer plate out of the frame. So this way I can work with everything separately. And the way that these parts fit together, it's kind of hard to tell. The instructions are so worn out. This goes down here. And let's see. This looks like a threaded hole here. But this one also appears to be threaded. I think this just sits here. Except it kind of binds up with the shaft, so it can't be that screw. Also, the motor is going to have to screw on there first. So I'll go ahead and get that in place. It looks like the screw that holds the motor together also holds it to the plate, at least partially. Then there's also this one. So I'll just loosen that. This is a very unique way of putting things together. Not exactly the best way either. I'm just going to drill the threads out of this hole, use the one screw to hold the motor down, and that's going to be enough. right, that slips in now. So I can put this other screw back in. Yeah, that'll do just fine. I think I will need some sort of a spacer in there, though. Oh, in fact, looks like this brush does get grounded to the frame, unless some sort of insulation is put in there. It's almost like this whole thing was only kind of half thought out before they put it into a box and sold it. Never seen anything quite like this before. But I will definitely have to cut that thread down, or it's just going to sit down on the worm there. Yeah, there's no other way to get that to work. That's going to have to be modified a little bit. Since that screw is brass, I just clipped it off. Now I can put this back in here. And things will still align as I tighten the screw. Well, since that brush does get grounded, I might as well make sure that this is going to run in the correct direction. Let's see, that is negative and positive to the top. Okay, that is going to be just fine. So, lucky guess on the side for the insulated wheels. And we'll screw in place. And yeah, since I cut that screw down, it is not binding with the gears. It's really not much to rely on for keeping the truck in place, is it? Now let's put some glue on that. Well, that's not going to work with that at all, is it? Okay. All right, let's see if that does it. Yeah, that'll have enough clearance. And as for the fit to the truck, okay, that'll be just fine. All right, so what I ended up doing instead was drilling the hole out in this plate just a little larger, and then using a slightly larger screw to go up into the motor plate with a little bit of glue to help keep it in place so that can swivel freely. So everything has the clearance it needs and should all work correctly now. Yeah, so let's get these pulleys on here. Let's see, I think this one's supposed to go on the motor and this one's supposed to go on the truck. Well, maybe it's actually the other way around. So that way you can do lower speed, much lower speed or high speed on the truck. Just got to loosen that screw a little bit. And then the motor pulley, I don't know if that's a press fit or a slip fit. Whatever it is, it's a tight fit. They don't say on the instructions how this is supposed to be attached. It probably was supposed to be press fit, but it's not quite working out here, so I think I'll expand that hole just a touch. Okay, now that's slipping on there. I think I want to line it up with that pulley so that it runs at a more reasonable speed. So I'll just put some glue onto this shaft. It's far enough from the bearing that I don't have to be too careful about the amount. Okay, so that looks like it's kind of lined up with both of them. Let's see if the spring belt works. Okay. Puts a lot of resistance on there. A lot more than an elastic belt. It's drawing over an amp. It's run at 12 volts there. And it has a lot of trouble starting up too. That's not going to work too well, is it? And I'll keep this with the model just since it came with it, but let's try an Athearn belt. So before I try an Athearn belt, I decided I would do some more modification to this mounting plate here. So I drilled a big hole for that brush holder to fit through so that it can actually sit flush on there. That should reduce the amount of tension needed on that spring belt, but should still have enough for good grip. So we'll see how that works. Somehow I drilled that hole so perfectly that the brush is now isolated from the frame. Anyway, let's see if this works. Well, it's only 1 amp now instead of 1.2, so that's something at least. It's not good, but it's something. It still has trouble starting. I wonder if remagnetizing this motor would help at all. Magnet doesn't feel real strong right now. Let's see if this changes it. Well, after multiple tries and techniques, I did get the motor powered up as much as I could, and the amperage was still close to 1 amp. So it got a little bit better, but still wasn't quite good enough. So put an Athearn belt on there. Let's see how this works. Just over a 1/2 amp. And it starts consistently. So that's a lot better. Well, since that's at least good enough now, I think we can go ahead and finish this off with a little bit of grease. So just get that running a little bit, not too fast. Maybe a little faster than that. Good enough. Okay, that should be good enough. Alright, I just cleaned that up from its second time in the vinegar bath. And I'd say that's got the metal pretty well detarnished now, so I should be able to get to repairing and resoldering this into one piece. It looks like that one wasn't the only one with a bad solder joint. In fact, you can feel these rattling around too. Yeah, it looks like this whole model really just wasn't assembled that well at the factory. Right, so the first thing I need to do, obviously, is repair this whole broken and folded up seam here. So I'm going to start by using these pliers right here that have a smooth jaw. So that way I can just kind of get a good grip, bend it around without damaging things. Just have to work gently around that. Okay. So I think that's going to meet up pretty well at this point. So instead of trying to work these parts individually though, I think what I'm going to do next is go ahead and solder this joint together, and then I can kind of tap that flat with something, which I'll figure out later. We'll see if we can get that nice and smooth. I've got that lined up as well as possible. I'm just going to place that down on a piece of cardboard while I work. Then get some flux in there just to help with the solder. That spreads through pretty quickly. It's a really thin liquid. And as for the iron, I'm using my large tip to make sure that it heats it up as efficiently as possible. As long as I can get part of it tacked into place, the rest of the soldering should go pretty quickly. That feels like it's going to hold together pretty well, so I'll just go ahead and fix the rest of that joint there, which you can see those parts really don't meet together that well, so that'll need to be somewhat filled with solder, and then I can file and sand that down smooth. Well, it may not look that good yet, but that joint is at least repaired. It took a lot of solder inside to fill that gap, so I just need to smooth that out. And as I've been going around this, I found that a lot of the solder joints were poorly done. I had to redo that one there, of course, since it had already broken, but also back here, as well as up here for the coupler slot. And then, of course, the fans all being broken off, and then some of these railings are really loose too, like I can rattle them around with my finger. So I've got a lot of repair work to do on this, but first, I'll make sure that this is nice and smooth, and then move on to the rest. I don't have anything fancy set up here, but I think I can at least tap some of this out using this piece of steel here and a hammer. Just to... This probably isn't going to do too much since there isn't anything inside to reinforce it, but I couldn't fit anything of the proper shape in there, so I think I can at least get some of that bending out with this. Yeah, it's not really doing a lot, so I think I'll just, for the most part, file this smooth. And considering how many filing marks are here already from the factory, well, lucky for me, that means I can't really make it look any worse than it already is, so let's get to it. I think that's about as much as I can do there without actually destroying something, so next I'm going to fill in some of that using some baking soda and liquid super glue. So I'll just pile some of that on there. And get the super glue. One thing I forgot about Gorilla's liquid glue is that it's actually too thick for this kind of use, so sometimes you've got to get the thin, cheap stuff like these single-use Scotch tubes or dollar store super glue, which is basically the same stuff. Now, if I drip that down, drip that down, drip down, there. So that will spread along and harden with the baking soda. And that may be a little too much on there though, so just take up what hasn't reacted. And I'll put a little more on there. Just kind of build it up a little bit. Then I can file and sand that down however I need. Yeah, so it's a little lumpy right now, but I should be able to file that down and then smooth it a bit more with some sandpaper, and the joint will look a lot better than it did before. All right, some filing and sanding later, and that's pretty smooth now. It looks bad, but with a coat of paint, I think it'll be covered up pretty well. This side of the model looks a lot better. They got things aligned correctly so that the window frame and the number board were fully intact, but on this side they got that spot so rough that they just kept filing and filing down, I think. So what I've got here doesn't really look much different from the original, aside from there being super glue and baking soda to fix the joint, but yeah, the shape of it, it's all pretty much how it was shaped out of the factory. But with that done, I think I can get on to fixing the rest of these solder joints now and getting these details put where they're supposed to be. And to take care of all these solder joints, since this body does still have some age and tarnish on it, I'm using flux with all the different points to be soldered just to help things spread a little bit better. Normally the flux that's within the core of the solder I use is enough, but once in a while you gotta have the extra strength. Let's give that a minute to heat up and flow. But let's see. Yeah, that seems to be on there nice and strong. So I'll do the same for the rest of these solder joints, which also includes the handrails as well as this brace here. With that, I think the body will be durable enough to get this thing together for testing and then painting. Once in a while, the soldering iron just isn't quite enough to finish a joint on these things, so let's see if this little flamethrower can do the job. Okay, that was actually even worse than the soldering iron. And when all else fails, sometimes you've just got to hit things with a wire wheel and really clean off the decades of tarnish. Now, get this back in there. Try it again. Okay, I think I've got the body all fixed. It definitely helps to use the wire wheel to take off some of that tarnish in certain areas. So, yeah, horns attached nice and firm now. I also fixed the frame mount there, coupler box, and a couple other joints, like the back plate was mostly off. So now I think I can get on to putting the chassis together so that we can see if this will be a good running model. Let's see, so that goes there. Here, finally getting that together. Okay, I ended up having to replace one screw because it fell into the carpet and I have no idea where it went. Now for the front truck. Yeah, I just need to get this together along with a bit of fresh oil. Okay, and this needs the insulator for mounting. And that will have a screw going through it. Ah, so the screw comes up from underneath. Oh, I see. Forgot about this bolster here. That makes sense then. I'm pretty sure a lot of these screws are actually not originally part of this kit, or they just threw in a whole bunch expecting that whoever bought it would cut the screws themselves. which is definitely a possibility with this one. So I guess what I'll have to do is cut one of these screws down. Unless I have one in my parts bin that'll just kind of fit correctly. So I might as well go through that. This one looks about the right size. Threaded in nicely. But you know what? That truck is sitting too close to the frame and it's dragging all those screws. Okay, maybe I need some washers or something in there. There, that should do. Katie red washer. I need to do something about how that plastic spacer fits, or actually, the spacer isn't even shown in the instructions, so I think I just need to put the screw in. Let that be it. Seems a little bit loose. Yeah, so it needs something to stabilize it because that body is going to wobble all over the place. Okay, I drilled and expanded that out with a round file so that it is as close to an exact fit as possible to this piece. So that should make for a better fit. Okay, so now the screw is tightened down and the truck has a little more holding it in place. So that should make it more stable. I do need to turn that around though, I got the wheels on the wrong sides. Okay, I think that's gonna work. So now I need to get the motor wired up. And I think for the power from the front truck, I'm just gonna have to solder a wire directly to the truck. Okay, that's wired up. It's just one last thing before I put the shell on for testing is to put in the weight. And this only gets glued in. So just put a little around there. And there. That should be enough to hold it. I'll make sure I don't get that on my fingers. Okay. That should hold on good and strong. And for fitting into the shell, place that in there. I should be able to, well, actually first, almost forgot. I need to take these two screws out. Okay, now that's in. It seems like the screws will be able to align just barely. There, got one screw down. So as long as I can get them started, they'll go in fine. It's just getting them started that's the hard part. Okay, screws are all in, so there's the assembled model. That is definitely not a realistic model of an F3 at all. All right, there it is on the track. See what happens. Oh, there it goes. Hey, it runs. Noisy, of course. And wobbly. The body's just not stable on this truck, is the problem. The wheels are perfectly fine. They're actually pretty well turned and engineered. gotta say that aside from the electrical pickups there, I think I just need to do a little more cleaning on the wheels, front wheels anyway. This has turned out to be a better runner than I expected. So aside from installing headlights, I think that's all the major work that needs to be done to get this fixed up and running again. But looking at the model, let's face it, this is not a good looking brass or bronze model at all. Like, I know a lot of the brass models, a lot of you prefer to see them stay unpainted because they shine so nicely. But this one, this needs a paint job. Now, as for what paint job to do on there, well, let's see what you all have to say. All right, this poll I'll just keep open for a few days, and I don't feel like doing anything especially complicated for the paint, so I picked these out because those railroads all had dual headlight F3s. So let's see just what railroad you would all like. And the winner is Southern Pacific with over 40% of the vote, so that's exactly what I'm gonna do. Southern Pacific Black Widow painting is in progress, and it might not be my best work, but I think it's turning out pretty good so far. So I'm just letting some of that paint dry before I put on the decals and do the final detail colors, and then I'll give it its finishing coat. Well, skipping ahead here, painting is done, as you can see. I've got the Black Widow paint and decals all in place. I think that turned out looking pretty nice, even if I didn't do a perfect job. So the only thing left I'm going to do is add the headlight bulbs, but I'm not going to use the originals that came with it. Just after looking at them, even though they do turn on, I don't really trust them. And then the chassis, that's also painted. I replaced these two screws with some common 080s just because the originals were not holding up well. So these are doing a lot better. They're easier to put in too. So that's working just fine. So we'll get on to installing those headlights and then get this thing back together. Well, I've got some headlight bulbs in there. I 3D printed new parts based on the design of the originals and put in some new light bulbs. They're not LEDs, they're just regular light bulbs. And hooked that up to the motor, so that wire should stay out of the way while the shell is on there. So let's get to putting this together and getting it finished up. Just getting this last long screw in. Okay, and that is now fully assembled. I think I'm gonna see if I can put a couple couplers on there, and we'll see how that all looks on the track after I glue this back on. All right, glue wasn't working out, so I cleaned up the joint and resoldered it, so now I'll just touch up the paint and get that back on. All right, and there it is, all done and ready to go. I even managed to fit a rear coupler on there. I just used glue and baking soda with a pin to hold it in place, just because that coupler box cannot properly hold any standard KD coupler, so I improvised a bit. It is actually able to spring back and forth a little bit. I used some of the knuckle springs, just kind of shoved into there with a touch of glue to hold onto the coupler, and that seems to be working fine. So it can actually pull something, although the coupler is a little bit high, even using this one with the lower set head on it. Now anyway, getting this thing powered up. Still works fine. A little bit of body wobble on there. Headlights are working. It can run faster than this, but it doesn't really like to. And of course, electrical pickup is with only 4 wheels. It's up to 12 volts. It gets really noisy once you push it over about 8 or 9 volts. So I would definitely recommend keeping it in the range of no more than about 8 volts for the best running quality. The Darth belt seems to be working fine in there, although I will include the spring belt with it, just so all the original parts are there. Yeah, it's going to have a little trouble with switches. Not much to do about that without adding additional electrical pickups, but for this one, I didn't really want to go quite that far with it. I just wanted to kind of fix this up and get it running as close to how it was supposed to be as possible. And I think the paint really did help it to look a lot better than that tarnished and kind of beat up old looking bronze that they had there. So looking around the model, you can see that there are some spots that aren't perfect. The paint didn't quite cover all the work that I did to reattach the front of the cab in that area. And of course, the nose of the thing isn't even close to being accurately shaped, so I had to do quite a bit of work to get those front stripes to fit properly around there. Took a lot of setting solution, but that turned out looking pretty nice, I think. And now I've got it hooked up to a string of freight cars there. It's just 8 behind it, but I think that'll be about as much as you ever really want to put behind this one with the 4-wheel drive system and the old belt drive design. I think that looks pretty good with it. It's running just fine. Uses over half an amp even at this speed. But with the motor being an open frame, it'll stay cool enough. I think it'll run for a long time, maybe just need an occasional belt replacement and the occasional oiling and greasing for the gears and bearings. Standard maintenance. But beyond that, I think this will be a dependable runner if someone wants it to be that. It could also be just kind of a unique display piece. If it's not a well-detailed model, it is an interesting one.